Warwickshire is
BBC CWR.
Anyway, roller coasters is what we're talking about today. The Blackpool Pleasure Beach roller coaster. And that's all it's called. It's just the roller coaster, but you know the one I mean. It's made of wood and it's exactly the same as it was 100 years ago. What is it, though, that makes a roller coaster so special? Well, let's have a word with Professor Brendan Walker, who is a thrill engineer. That sounds exciting, Professor Brendan. What a job. Now, I understand you're on a site as we speak building a roller coaster.
It's not quite a roller coaster. It's a set of playground swings with virtual reality headsets that make you feel like you're on a roller coaster. We're currently in Victoria Park in Tower Hamlets.
Oh, wow, that's so exciting. Now, this takes me back a little. I don't know if you remember, when the Future arrived at Alton Towers, they had, was it called Cine 2000? Basically a tent. So this was early doors virtual reality. It was a tent and you went inside and it had like lots of 3D films. So you felt like there were balloons coming out the back of a lorry and things like that coming at you. So that's very reminiscent of that, although a bit more high tech. So you don't actually need roller coasters anymore. You can just, that's not the same though, is it?
No, absolutely not. No, we're always going to need roller coasters. I mean, rides like the Big Dipper up at Blackpool Pleasure Beach are always going to excite us because we need that physical sensation of movement. I mean, we've evolved to be animals that move, that get excited by movement, and that's what roller coasters deliver in spades, movement.
That's what it is, but also there's... basically that feeling that you've cheated death as well.
Yeah, well, with the modern world, life is much safer than it used to be several hundred years ago. And the sensation of thrills evolved to keep us safe and to reward what I call the persistence of life, either evading death or actually chasing something you're going to eat. And in our modern world, we don't feel those kind of situations, so we no longer feel alive. So we need to actually fabricate ways to go and play at that dangerous edge. And amusement parks and roller coasters like the Big Dipper, again, are fantastic places to go and experience and experiment at those edges and really come away feeling super euphoric with that real sense of being alive in that moment.
To be honest, with the whole of Blackpool, you're dabbling a little bit with that feeling of life or death, but particularly on the coasters, there is something magical, isn't there? I mean, obviously, the wooden roller coaster stands in the shadow of the big one, a giant iron, twisted, uppy, downy coaster for a modern generation, but there is something spectacular about that beautiful wooden coaster, isn't there? It's a little work of art.
Yeah, it's incredibly sculptural, and also the wood means that during different seasons, it can sway in the wind up to several inches. It'll be fast on one day, slower on others. And it has got a much more, I think, sort of a more gentle movement to it, which is much more, I think, sort of natural. So I'd say if you want to be sort of felt like you're being thrown around in a washing machine, yes, go on a steel coaster. But if you want to feel that sort of smooth sense and get much more pleasure out of your thrill, not so much adrenaline, but a real sort of sense of pleasure, then wooden roller coasters are always going to win out over steel coasters.
You say that, I think there is a genuine thrill to be had. We played a little clip earlier on of the Grand National, of me on that a couple of years ago. And when you're atop these wooden rickety structures, there's an element of doubt, I've got to admit.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Grand National, I've got a real interest in that ride in particular because we want to make a simulation of that so that people who have wheelchair access difficulties can get on a simulator, ride the Grand National, and actually with friends who visited Blackpool Pleasure Beach, they can all go home having had the same experience. So the Grand National as well, I think, it's still got thrills and spills that they've always talked about for the last 100 years.
That's a wonderful thing, actually, that everybody can enjoy it. I don't know if you watched Traitors. We did, and we loved it. But there was a girl on Traitors, Meryl, who is of restricted height, and they did this ride thing on Traitors part of the game, and she said, this is the first time I've ever been able to join in with something that everybody else can. And I think it's really important that we remember that. Presumably that's part of the development of modern rides?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is, I'm just looking at our swings right now. One of them is a wheelchair access platform. So the whole family can come down, have exactly the same experience. So I think as rides mature, we'll be looking more at inclusivity, accessibility, and just various ways. And obviously technology can help us. So a ride like the big one, we don't need to do anything to that, but maybe you can work around the edges to make it much more inclusive.
It'll be interesting to see how technology develops in the future. But for now, though, do you occasionally just go up to Blackpool Pleasure Beach just for the crack to have a go on some of the older rides?
I do. In fact, I was up there 3 years ago with a professor of vertigo. He was in his 80s. And he's a very proper professor, unlike me. And it's the first time I heard expletives come out of his mouth. And that was on the big one. I've got it on video.
What a beautiful thing. Listen, thank you so much for joining us, Professor Brendan Walker. What a lovely man who is a professor, a thrill engineer. What a job to have. It will be interesting to see how coasters develop in the future. But for now, though, there is something wonderful, something architectural, something glorious in these old rides.